One.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Central Region RAC. It's the 10th of May at 6 o'clock. Had to look at the date. My name is Brock McMillan. I'm the chair of the RAC. We have barely a quorum here. Hopefully a few more show up, but we do have a quorum, so we're ready to go. This meeting is being, for those online, this meeting is being held in person at the Central Region office. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is the charge of setting wildlife policy for the state. We all have ideas. I'd love to see how many public are here today. I encourage all who wish to express their opinion to do so. However, we also expect respect for each other's opinions in here. So I'm not going to go into the whole thing they want me to read. Just don't be rude. I'd like to welcome the RAC members, and we'll introduce ourselves. We'll start with Ben.
Ben Nutter, Public at Large.
Scott Jensen, Public at Large.
Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Ken Strong, Sportsman's Rep.
Mike Christensen, a large.
And online we have Danny. Do you want to introduce yourself, Danny?
Yeah, Dan Potts, non-consumptive.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Both Luke Decker and Josh Leonard are excused from this meeting due to other obligations. Would also like to welcome the DWR staff. That includes Kyle Maynard. He's online. He's from the Attorney General's office. Heather Talley, the on here it says big game coordinator, but she is not the big game coordinator. Upland game coordinator, and Dax Mangus, the Northern Region wildlife manager, who is sitting in for Chad Wilson. Welcome to all the public that are attending in person and online. Those that are here in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to do so, you need to fill out one of these yellow cards. We'll only consider comments from those that have handed in a yellow card. And they're out on the table right outside the door. Fill it in. You can hand it to Ben. He'll pass it up and get it up to us. So if you have a comment on any of the agenda items, we need to have one of those yellow cards from you. The people watching on YouTube will not be able to provide live comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided well in advance, and everybody had an opportunity to provide online comments before this meeting. With that, here we go. One more. Good. With that, I will call for approval of the agenda and minutes.
Approved.
So we have a motion from Ken and a second from Jim Schuler. All those in favor, show by the hand. Danny, okay. Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. Excellent. At this time, I'll give everybody an update from the last board meeting. The last board meeting was regarding bucks and bulls. Let's see. The first motion from the board meeting was to approve the buck deer permit recommendations as presented by the division. That motion passed unanimously. That may be the first time I've ever been to the bucks and bulls meeting where that happened, which is pretty awesome. The next motion was to increase bull elk tags on the beaver unit to 36, and that motion failed. And then there was a subsequent motion to increase the bull elk tags on the beaver unit to 65, and that motion passed 5-1. And then there was a motion to approve the remaining elk and pronghorn permit recommendations as presented by the division, and that motion passed unanimously. There was then, on the once in a lifetime permit recommendations, a motion to reduce the 9 Mile Jack Creek bighorn sheep permits from 3 to 2, and increase the North Slope, South Slope, High Uintas archery mountain goat permit from 1 to 2. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to renew the 5-year plan for removal of additional bison on Antelope Island for the remainder of the recommendations as presented by the division. That motion passed unanimously. The next one was antlerless permit recommendations. There was a motion to accept as presented. That passed unanimously. The next item was CWMU antlerless permit recommendations. That motion was to accept as presented. That motion passed 4 in favor with 2 recusals for conflict of interest. And then the final motion was dealing with bighorn sheep dates and conservation permits. And there was a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented, and that motion passed unanimously. And that's what happened at the last board meeting. I'll now turn the time over to Jason to give a regional update.
Thanks, Brock. Let me get this sharing here. Oops. Is that sharing, Mike?
It's not sharing. It came on and it went away.
Let me try that again. There we go. All right. Thanks, RAC members. I appreciate the opportunity to share a couple items, things that are going on in the RAC meeting today, or sorry, in our region over the last couple of weeks. Just a couple of reports from our wildlife section. Our biologists are wrapping up their sage grouse let counts. Generally across the region, we saw some pretty stable populations on most of the leks. And these are mostly kind of the low elevation leks on the West Desert in that country out there. Up on our Strawberry lek, we did see an increase in males on that lek this year. Not exactly sure why. We saw a little bit of decrease in birds, but this year we saw an increase on the males. So we'll be doing a little more work to try to figure out what exactly caused that. And then just really quickly, we do have a few hunts going on, a turkey hunt and a bear hunt. And today I put a picture of our outreach manager up there. He was successful this spring on taking a turkey. So we're pretty excited about that and good success on those hunts. In our aquatic section, something that we've been working on for over 2 years now is the Strawberry Reservoir Fishery Management Plan. And it's something that we started, and then COVID came in and really changed the dynamics of how our group met. We were able to pick it back up after a little while. We've been able to come up with kind of a final draft that I'll be sending out to the committee later this week for their review, and then you'll probably be seeing that come through the RAC process as an informational item in a future RAC. So we're glad to have that done and excited to get it implemented. We will be doing some sampling at Yuba Reservoir, some of it just to see survival for that reservoir is drawn down pretty low every year, and water sent out to the west. So we'll be looking at some of the drought impacts and survival on the fish that we've put in there in the past. So we'll be working on that. And then if you remember at our last meeting, I mentioned some white bass kill off in Utah Lake. We did go out and collect some additional white bass for a couple of reasons, for disease certification out there, but we also sent some to our fisheries experimental station for tests to see if there's anything we can see and give us a little more clarity on why we might have had that die off out there. In our habitat section, out on the West Desert, we have got quite a few guzzlers that we turn on and turn off in the fall and the winter time so they don't freeze, and then we go back out in the spring and turn them back on. So we have staff out there right now turning those guzzlers back on, some big game, some upland game, as well as some bighorn sheep guzzlers. We'll continue to update those guzzlers and make improvements on them as needed as well. Our wildlife management areas are opening up across the region. We do shut those down to access in the wintertime. As you'll probably remember, those WMAs are primarily purchased for wildlife and wildlife habitat. So in the winter, we try to give them the opportunity to not be harassed or have people in there. Thanks, Jim. Our wildlife management areas over the last few years have been shown a lot of love. We've had a lot of traffic in these WMAs, and we welcome that. We just would ask that as you're in there, that you might take some time and pick up any trash or anything that you put in there. We have one above my house in Manti that has a shooting range on it. Take the kids up there all the time, and I had to put a picture of my son up there practicing his pistol. But we encourage people to use those sensibly and excited to have those back open. We are excited this fall with the help of a lot of different partners, sportsmen's groups and the Forest Service. We'll be doing some high elevation projects. Two of the ones I'd like to highlight are on Strawberry Ridge, as well as 12 Mile on the Manti Range. I have a picture there in the bottom that shows kind of what we're going to be. That's a before picture. That probably used to be a full aspen stand. You can see that conifers starting to encroach into those aspens. So we'll be targeting those conifers to take those out and release aspen and provide some more additional habitat for wildlife. So we're really excited about that as we put resources into some higher elevation work this next fall. In our outreach section, today was a great day. It's a day that we haven't been able to do for the last couple of years due to COVID, but it was our Salem Ponds Kids Fishing Day. And this has been an event that has been going on for 25 years. We're excited about it. There's so many cooperators and people that help out with this event. I don't even dare start to mention because I'll leave somebody out. But it's meant to give kids with special needs a day to go and catch a fish. And they're all guaranteed to catch a fish. We make sure that happens. This year we had about 1,000 kids out there. Took a couple of pictures. The banks are just full of kids. We've got Smokey Bear. The county is out there. We've just got so much help to make this happen. And it's a fun day to watch those kids catch a fish and be able to take it home with them. And talking with some of the groups there, some of those kids have done this for years and years. And the last 2 years, they keep asking, when are we going fishing? When are we going fishing? And, you know, it's something that they remember and they enjoy. And we're excited to make that happen for them, or at least help make that happen. So I know Ken was out there today, and, you know, he's done it for a lot of years, and appreciate your service out there as well, Ken. It wouldn't happen without volunteers and dedicated people out there. And speaking about dedicated, pretty soon we'll be learning who is new dedicated hunters. We do have service projects posted on our webpage. So if your credit card gets hit and you're the lucky one, be sure to go check the webpage to make sure that you can get your hours, start working on some service projects. Those service projects, again, are extremely helpful in managing habitat and wildlife throughout the state. And before I say thank you, I have one of our newer conservation officers here. And maybe, Todd, if you'd come up and just introduce yourself and maybe where you're at and maybe a little background.
Okay, I'm Todd Morgan. I grew up in this area. Jason and I actually went to school together. But I'm all the area's southern Utah County. Took over, if you knew Sean Bagley, he retired, and so I took over his district. But I spent 25 years in the military doing stuff, and now I'm excited to be serving the people here in the state of Utah, especially Utah County and Central Region. So just wanted to let all of you know who I am, and then everybody in the public that I'm out there and excited to be here.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate it. We're excited to have Todd here as well. He's got a lot of experience to bring to our region, and look forward to continue working with him. Thanks, Todd. And that's all I have, unless there's any questions from the RAC.
Questions for Jason? Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
We've had two RAC members show up. Chase, Eric, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Chase Crandall, Agriculture.
Eric Reed, BLM.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the first agenda item. It says here, conflict of interest from Kyle Maynard. See Kyle's online. Yeah, there you go.
Evening, can you hear me all right?
We can hear you great, Kyle.
Oh, great. So I'm Kyle Maynard. I'm the Assistant Attorney General assigned to the Division of Wildlife. So I promise I won't take up too much of your time, and I appreciate you letting me speak to you today. It's been about a year since we did our RAC and board training, and I thought it was as good a time as any to do a quick refresher on our conflicts of interest law and just kind of walk through those really quickly. There's a couple of statutes in Utah Code that really speak to conflict of interest, and those two are 6716 and our Natural Resources Code, which is 79 2 and 203. So what that requires is the disclosure of conflicts of interest, and then in certain situations where there's a substantial conflict for members of natural resources, it requires you to refrain from voting on that matter. But it doesn't mean you can't participate in the discussion. So I just said a lot of words. So what exactly does that mean? We really break these down into two categories. You have your actual conflicts of interest, and you have perceived conflicts of interest. An actual conflict of interest is one that would require abstention from voting and to declare what that conflict is. Some examples of those are if a member of the body is an officer, employee, or director, and administrator of an organization or business that is going to be impacted by a matter before the RAC and board. Similarly, a member, a spouse, or a minor child, or a member of the board that has a substantial ownership interest. And substantial is about 10% or greater. And that would be financially or economically impacted by a matter up for vote. A member would be financially or economically impacted either direction in a manner different from the general public. The member's immediate family may be financially or economically impacted in a way that's different from the general public. A member would be unable to objectively evaluate and make independent decisions on a proposal before the public body. And finally, a member whose personal investments in an organization or business will create a substantial conflict between private and public responsibilities. So those are scenarios where you'd be required by statute to make a declaration of here's how I'm involved, and I think I should refrain from voting in this matter. Conversely, you have your perceived conflicts of interest, and these I know are difficult. Where a member should be publicly declare their affiliation and prior to making a decision, and state affirmatively or negatively whether they would feel like they have objectivity on the matter. And if you feel confident that you can remain objective and perform your public duty, then you can continue to vote. And those matters differ from actual conflicts in that they do not involve an economic or financial situation or substantial interest in an entity. So that's kind of my quick spiel. And anytime something comes up and you have a question, feel free to shoot me an email or call. My door is always open.
Hey, Kyle, I have a question if that's okay.
Sure.
So if we're making a decision on something that I stand to gain or lose a financial gain or loss, I can sit here and argue to everybody one way, I just can't vote? Correct.
Yeah, you are allowed to participate in conversation, but you just cannot vote in that matter. And that is, if you're ever curious, that is in your natural resources code. And it affirmatively states that you can participate, you just cannot vote.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions for Kyle? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
The next item on the agenda is the Upland Game Management Plan. We'll invite Heather Talley up. I don't know, Heather, do you want to give any brief statement before we fire questions at you? You bet.
Are we good now? Okay. All right. There was an oversight on my part for this recommendation I just wanted to make everyone aware of before we start. In the taking turkey rule, under the identification of species and sex, we would need to strike out the first point under that states during the spring seasons, the head and beard must remain attached to the carcass of the wild turkey being transported. So we'd need to strike out during the spring seasons because now we are having an either sex tag and as well as a beardless tag in the fall. And then we have the second part we just strike out completely that says during the fall season, only the head must remain attached to the carcass of the wild turkey while being transported. So we just want to keep everything intact there.
Thank you. Questions from the RAC for Heather?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Heather, remind me, relative to turkeys, we still manage on a regional basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
We're not broken down any more refined than regions.
Right. For the spring turkey hunt, it is just the regional boundaries, our limited entry boundaries.
So one of the comments that came through the RAC process was like regarding some populations, it seems like there's more pressure on. There's somebody who commented from the Ochre Mountain population or over by the Ochre Mountains. Are we at a point with turkeys where it makes sense to manage on a smaller unit basis now, like we've done with deer, or does management on a large region still work?
Was that comment directed towards the fall hunt?
I think in general, there are certain populations that they feel like are being maybe overhunted or overpressured.
In certain areas?
And others that maybe aren't.
Gotcha. So I think that in relation to that specific question, I thought there was something that had to do with the fall hunt for that. And Jason Robinson, we do have online with some data that he's broken down to share with the region. So I don't know if Jason, are you available and able to share?
Yeah, sure. You hear me okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, I can talk specifically about the Ochre Mountain comment in the fall hunt. We did look at harvest over the last 4 years in Tooele County, not just specifically Ophir Canyon, but over the last 4 years with the fall hunt in Tooele County, we've harvested a total of 30 hens, which is an average of about 7 hens per year. That Ophir Canyon area, looking at the data, on average, looks like 1 or 2 hens are killed out of that specific canyon each year during the fall hunt. So, not a huge impact, even at a local scale, on fall hunting, at least in that part of the state. Obviously I can't talk for, the broader area, but specific to that canyon and that mountain range, doesn't seem to have a big impact.
So just more generally across the state, do you feel like the regional boundary is adequate to manage birds? Or do we need to be looking at smaller units now?
I feel like just more research in turkeys in general is always a good thing. And we are opening the turkey statewide plan this coming year. So this summer, we're going to be reaching out to people for committee members and everything to try to get, and we can have those kinds of discussions at that point and see what people are feeling like with the harvest that we've had, with our triggers that we have in place, if they feel that we need to manage to a smaller scale. But where that plan is going to be open this summer, I'd like to work through that process with that.
There was another comment kind of regarding pheasants versus investing in turkeys, right?
Yes.
Maybe
there
you could
was.
speak to just across the state, what proportion of suitable habitat have birds been released in? Is there still opportunity for more turkey releases, or have we pretty well occupied the habitat that birds are suitable for?
I still feel like there's plenty of opportunity for turkey releases. I feel like there's a lot of flocks that we can supplement to increase hybrid vigor, heterozygosity. I do have some information though, if you'll give me just a second to look it up, because I did see that question and I wanted to comment on what we're doing for turkeys and pheasants in general. So we do a lot through our WRI program, which I'm sure everyone here is aware of. And through the years since the implementation of WRI, we have done 630 projects that have benefited turkeys. Over $161 million have gone towards turkeys, and that's over 700,000 terrestrial acres, almost 24,000 riparian acres, and over 2,000 stream miles that we put towards turkeys. And just to contrast that a little bit, I wanted to kind of share with pheasants, we do have a grant that we use for that money. So a lot of people have thought that we're using license dollars, but it's actually a hunter education grant. And we have PR through that. We use the match with restricted. And with that, we have $200,000 a year. So if you're looking at where we've got turkeys are getting $1 million a year or so or more, and then we're spending $200,000 a year on this put and take program. And this has always been intended for an R3 movement, not in any capacity to augment existing populations. So we just wanted to make that clear so people don't think that we're releasing rooster pheasants in response to dwindling populations, because it's just for that hunting opportunity.
One more.
Okay.
Are we selling out of fall over-the-counter permits in every region now?
That is a good question. I can pull up some data in 1 second.
I think my kids bought the last one in the central region because I got 3 of them bought and I tried to buy the 4th and they were done. So we must have got the last one. Maybe wonder if statewide we're kind of in the same boat. And I guess where I'm going with that is if that's the case, representing the public at large, we can give more opportunity by maybe eliminating 3 permits per person. Is that something that we could consider? Maybe 1 or 2 permits per person rather than 3. I'm curious about the proportion of people who buy 3 versus 1 or 2, and maybe hunter success across that. I don't know if you have any of that data available.
I do. It'll take me a minute to look it up, and I can also, Avery can help me look that up as well, so I can stay engaged. But yeah, as far as the caps, there are different caps that we can set for the total numbers of permits that are available. As far as the 3 permits per individual, that is dictated to us through our rule. So we would have to ask the Wildlife Board to open that rule in order to change that. And again, with rewriting the turkey plan, that's something that we could work on if people were amenable to that this coming summer and fall. And then also, just to keep in mind with these fall boundaries, these fall hunts were initiated with the intention of trying to alleviate localized nuisance and depredation issues and not a grand scale population. So that's why they're largely or exclusively on private property. We can always tighten those boundaries. The boundaries themselves can change each year, as well as the max number of permits allocated per region or per hunt. So we can definitely change those numbers, but we would have to make a rule change for the 3 per person to go down to 1 per person. So we could definitely ask the Wildlife Board to open that.
I have a question.
Mike first and then Ken.
Oh, thanks. So going off of that, in 2014, when the fall hunt started, they're very surgical. And now they're very just widespread. And do you see there being an issue where localized flocks could be over-harvested?
I believe that we're looking into that now as we've seen some decline. We have seen decline due to drought. There's no denying that. We definitely feel like we've had some really hot, dry summers, and that's probably impacting our recruitment to a large extent. And to combat that, we have seen, the central region was, I believe they were unlimited previously. They've gotten down to a cap last year. Also, northern region is planning on shrinking some of their boundaries. I know Jason Robinson had mentioned that he was talking about eliminating some of his areas as well and shrinking those boundaries. And so I think that as we respond to the changes in population, we're definitely looking at that. Some of the southern region as well has decided to omit some of their fall hunts.
So when you talk about reducing tag numbers or altering areas that are huntable, that's done internally within the division, or does that come back through the public process so we can have an input with that?
So the process by which it was originally designated went through the Wildlife Board to give us that internal flexibility so that each year we can make changes as our biologists are seeing different things on the ground. So that does happen internally, but then every 3 years, and this will be next year, we'll take back this entire process through the RAC again, and then that will be where people can change those things. And again, with the turkey plan being open as well, it'll give a lot of flexibility for changes.
Okay, and then, so the fall hunts, that seems to be where the heartburn comes in from the people that talk to me. And I've participated in that hunt. But when you say that in the presentation, you said that the fall hunts are to manage the population, correct?
Small localized populations, yes.
Okay. So why do we allow any bearded fall turkey hunts?
Why do we allow any bearded
Yeah,
turkey at all to be harvested in the fall? That's what you're, yeah. Well, there is an issue that if we do have a bunch of toms on somebody's property and they need to be dealt with, and if in some instances we've tried trapping and it doesn't always work. So in those instances where they can do a lot of damage, that's why we're still allowing for that permit. But that's, like you're saying, because we're looking to decrease the nuisance populations in those specific areas. That's why we wanted to go to 2 beardless or 2 beardless and 1 hunter's choice.
And then I think my last question is along what Scott was talking. In the rule doesn't say a hunter can obtain up to 3 fall turkey tags. Isn't that how the wording is? Can we pull that up? Because I don't see why we couldn't curtail that. If it's up to 3, then the division should have the ability to go with a number smaller than that.
Right. Let me bring it up again. 1 second.
Because I think Scott and I were buying the last tags because I got mine and then they're gone.
It just says in R 657 54-20 season dates, bag and possession limits, and areas open. Under number 1, season dates, bag and possession limits, areas open, and number of permits for taking wild turkey are provided in the guidebook of the Wildlife Board for taking upland game and wild turkey. And number 2 is a person may not obtain or possess more than 1 permit during the spring or season annually, or 3 permits during the fall season annually. So if one person cannot obtain more than, then we may have some flexibility, but right now it says they can't possess more than 3. So I don't know if we would need to do a rule change to say they cannot possess up to 3.
Okay, if our RAC recommended that it was up to 2 or 1, then powers that be down the road, could they figure that out if we were wrong?
We had one of the attorneys online just now. Is he still online? Could he address that?
I thought I saw him leave.
Kyle, you still
He's
there?
there.
Yeah, but I'm still here. So is your question about the language of the rule or kind of procedure on whether you can or should vote on this?
No, first, the language of the rule. The rule says, as Heather just read, cannot possess more than 3 tags. Does that mean we could recommend less than 3?
Off the top of my head, it sounds like yes. But, I'm kind of pulling that rule up in front of me now. The other thing is I would, since it's not, yeah, you could recommend that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
Question, a few years ago, we ruled out air guns being used because of the Pittman-Robertson Act. Has that changed at all, or is it still, are they donating to the Pittman-Robertson Act?
I don't believe they're qualified to pay a PR tax at the moment, but it did pass in legislation this past year that we will task the Wildlife Board with designating what species we're going to allow to take with air guns. And this is part of that recommendation. So there is something that's been done through code at the legislator level. And so we are responding to that by bringing this recommendation forward.
Okay, another question on pheasants. 65 years ago, the season was a 3-day hunt. You could shoot 2 roosters and 1 hen. 55 years ago, it changed to a 3-day hunt. You could only shoot roosters. And you could go out and kill 3 birds in 10 or 15 minutes. Then they slowly started to disappear. Now we have a limit of 2, and we got a month-long hunt. Now, I can understand it on the birds that are planted, but I do not understand it on to why we are allowing people on their own property that do nothing for the pheasants other than they have their own property to hunt. I mean, let's be realistic. We don't have pheasants. You can ride through the fields and you won't see a bird. And I look at what Sevier County's done. And they have pheasants starting to show up. You can go down and see them standing along the side of the road because they have a bounty on skunks, on raccoons, on all these little predators. And in the last 2 months, I have had a guy call me to come down to his place in Benjamin. I have killed 5 raccoons and 1 fox trying to get into his birds. Why can't we have a program like we do with the coyotes? We're never going to get any pheasants as long as we have predators. You can put 1 million birds out, and come fall, we might have 100,000 left. And I hunt in Nebraska, and we're told there that the reason the bird hunting's so good is they don't have a predator problem. And that's what we need to do if we're going to continue to put pheasants out. We need to lower it down, first of all, on the general public land. And second of all, we need to do something about the predators, because with the predators, we're never going to have a pheasant population.
So your question is, why can't we have a program like that?
Yes.
Is that a proposal, Ken?
We have time for discussion in a minute.
Hang on 1 second. I'm just looking up our information in our Upland plan because we do address this. We address the issues with pheasants. Largely, another reason why mesopredators have such an impact on pheasants is because the habitat is no longer there. We've gone away from ditch rows for farm practices. Now we have pivots. A lot of places where it used to be habitat for pheasants is now subdivisions. And if we had the better habitat, we would be able to provide that cover for them to escape from mesopredators. But we do mention in our plan that those types of programs haven't been shown to be incredibly successful. And I'm trying to find the exact statistics on that. But I know that it has been shown to not be very incredibly successful, and that is addressed in our upland plan.
But it is very successful in Sevier County. It's making a difference.
It may be making a difference. They're also doing a lot of habitat work there. We also have that pheasant farm there that, you know, some people are seeing a lot more pheasants that they think might be wild birds, but they're just some escapees from the pens as well. So it can definitely make an impact, but I'm just trying to find this. Maybe Avery, if Avery's on, if he's able to find that reference in the upland plan, we can look at the stats there. But we don't have the infrastructure set up at the moment for something like that. But I'll let Avery go ahead and speak to that really quickly.
Well, I know I can be driving down the road in January and February and see pheasants down in Sevier County.
Questions? Right now's the time for questions. I have one follow-up for what Ken said. So you said the legislature, and I think I read this, instructed you to designate which species. So we could say nothing but white-footed mice with an air gun, right? Until they pay PR money.
If that's the RAC's recommendation, absolutely, you can make that recommendation.
Okay.
Sorry, Avery.
Avery, go ahead.
I guess I wasn't sure what the exact question was on the bounties, but there's been quite a bit of research on predator bounties, and they have never really been shown to be successful at a large scale. So if you can do a program where you've got high intensity in a limited area and you already have sufficient habitat, you can make a difference. But when you're talking about county level even or state level, there hasn't been any evidence to show they're successful on a large scale. You were mentioning some of the Midwest pheasant states. I mean, one of the huge differences between, say, Nebraska and Utah is they've got huge amounts of small grain production still interspersed with a lot of CRP fields. So you've got basically a state of food plots with some cover. Or take example like North Dakota, they currently have a predator bounty program for mesopredators, and they have not shown a increase in populations due to their current program, despite spending huge amounts of money on it.
And I did find those citations too. That was a Bartel and Brunson 2003 paper, and then we have a few others, including Conifer Roberts 2017. So we do have some references in there in our upland plan, but I know your stance, Ken. I appreciate it.
Ken and I want it like the good old days where there were pheasants everywhere. Go ahead, Ben.
I'd like to pivot back to the fall turkey recommendation for a minute. Do we have an idea or numbers on people that are buying fall turkey tags? How many people are buying one versus three, or one versus more than one?
Yeah, we got a grandma request for that, so I just got that information emailed to me. 1 second. And it's kind of hard to stratify that information out, but we did get that in there.
And I think the root of that question is and the data may help us with this. The recommendation is to only allow beardless turkeys on 2 of those permits, but still allow either sex on 1. Is that going to have? Will that have an impact on, like a significant impact on the reduction of toms being harvested in the fall? That's really the question.
Right. We believe that should be helpful in having some of the toms make it through to the spring. We realize that some jakes are going to be taken of course, because at that time of year, but we do think that that will be helpful in leaving some of the toms behind. So 1 second, I'll just pull up this information.
And while you're pulling that up, you mentioned earlier, because Mike had asked a question about why not just all beardless tags in the fall? And I thought your answer was good to that there's occasions when we have a need for tom harvest. So my follow-up question to that is, how often do you see that being the case?
How often do we see tom harvest being the case?
The need for the tom harvest to address a specific issue.
That would be a regional question. I don't know if anybody at the region has an answer for that as far as how many tom issues you've seen. So it looks like we have a statistic based on percent of successful hunters who harvested only 1 bird, 2 birds, and 3 birds, and we have that broken out. And percent of field who had the number of permits, it looks like we've got, for 1 permit, we have a pretty high percentages, the high 70s to 100% of people having 1 permit in the field. And then when we get to having 2 permits in the field, we've got, again, 70s and 80% and 100% there. And then for people that have 3 permits in the field, we've got 85%, 64, 78, 47, and 72, depending on the region. So we do have, the majority of people are utilizing 3 permits.
So Ben, really quick, your question, so I understand that you're thinking that if we reduce the number of bearded tags to 1 from 3, then are we really going to reduce bearded take because more people could just buy more people could buy that tag and go shoot a tom?
Well, kind of. The question, if we found that most people were only buying 1 tag in the fall, then I don't think that making 2 of those beardless would have an impact on the bearded, on the tom take. That was the takeaway there. But if most of the people are buying 3 tags, then I agree that would have an impact.
Other questions for Heather? Questions from the public? I'll turn the time over to Jason to summarize public comments.
All right, thanks, Brock. Let's see, for the upland game and turkey recommendations, we had 6 responses come in through online to the central region, and they all left comments. The RAC has covered several of these. The first was talking about drought effects on pheasants and should we be using resources on turkey populations in the mountains, higher elevation. There was a concern about air guns would increase the wound loss if they were approved. One comment was replicate the fall hunt rules for the spring hunts. Somebody mentioned they'd like to have an increased opportunity for pheasants on WMAs. There was some overcrowding and they'd like to see more opportunity there. And then, as was mentioned by Scott, there was concern about the fall hunt harming the flocks on the Okers and some of those canyons near Stockton. Been a decrease in toms and jakes on some of those units. So we had, of those 6 comments, 5 of them, or 83%, somewhat agreed with recommendations. 17% strongly agreed, and we received no comments that disagreed or were neutral on those recommendations.
Thank you, Jason. Now we'll have public comments. First comment, Trevor Palmer.
So I've taken place in the fall hunt and the spring hunt, and I'm just gonna oppose the fall hunting altogether. I love hunting in the spring. There's definitely a lack of turkeys. Drought stricken areas are suffering majorly. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Trevor. By the way, everybody has up to 2 minutes to comment. Jordan Mattinson.
Thank you. And I also want to discuss with the fall hunts, opposing them. Hunting from north to south from the first week of the limited all the way to the end of the general, I'm seeing reductions out in the spring. Poults, I'm not seeing as many poult recruitments. And I would just like to see maybe a reduction, or if we can manage it in more of a micro management situation, if that's possible. I don't agree with the harvesting, and it seems like it's getting ordered a lot with the harvesting of females more than males. You need females for poults and continue on and grow flocks, and I'd just like to see that micromanaged if we could. So, thank you.
Thank you. Waylon Pritchett.
Waylon Pritchett, representing Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife. We would like to oppose this action. 40 years ago, simply, there was not very many turkeys in Utah, all across the state. After the successful introduction of the Rio Grande subspecies in 1984, continuous conservation efforts were taken in place for several years or years after, transplanting wild turkeys from across the nation to Utah. Some years breaking national records for the most turkeys transplanted in single years. From those efforts, turkey population numbers continue to grow. In 2008, Utah turkey permits went from a sole limited entry to an included over-the-counter general season with an unlimited quota. This was a true milestone in the success of the conservation story of turkeys in Utah. It's been a long, hard road to get here to where we're at now. In 2018, the action was proposed to increase fall permits. It also included the use of center fire weapons to aid in the control of nuisance turkey populations. 1,600 birds were already relocated in with the previous year, but there were still nuisances occurring.
So 20 seconds. So what part do you oppose?
Oh, sorry. I was going to get that at the end. We oppose going to the 2 unbearded and 1 either sex. We feel with the current drought conditions and the poor poult production that the harvest of hens is not going to be good for population numbers, that if we want to save more toms for the spring, it starts by saving more hens.
Thank you very much. Lynn Warwood.
Oh, I've got some more.
You're out of time.
Already?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
What? I thought organization got 5.
So 2 minutes in our rack for everybody.
Okay.
I'll give you 20 seconds if you have something else you want to say.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Waylon. Lynn Warwood.
Lynn Warwood with the National Wild Turkey Federation. The National Wild Turkey Federation, Utah State Board of the National Wild Turkey Federation. We oppose the use of air guns. They're not a turkey gun. We I've sent a letter to all the RAC chairs and the board. We also, we agree with the recommendation of the division for the fall hunt, knowing that we will be and are working on the 10-year plan. We have been working with the division on the plan already, and we accept that that recommendation so that we know that we have that coming in, that we can work on the fall numbers and the fall hunt. Heather attended the technical committee meetings last week. Some of that stuff was covered there, and we are working on that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Now I turn it over to the RAC for discussion. Go ahead, Ken, and then Scott.
Well, the one thing I don't like is the idea of use of air guns, and just because we don't get any funds from it yet, and if we're not getting any funds from it, we shouldn't allow it to be used. Let the air gunners go out, or the air gun manufacturers go out. So I am opposed to the use of air guns.
I generally agree with you, Ken, that if they're not going to pony up with the excise tax for benefiting wildlife, that it shouldn't be allowed as well. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to ask, I live in an area that's just flush with turkeys, so I guess I don't see the same issue. So across the state, are turkey numbers generally down? Are we seeing a pretty substantial downward trend right now because of drought?
We have seen a downward trend, and we're definitely attributing that to some of these drought conditions and recruitment.
Do we monitor birds on a population level at all, or how do we know where we're at relative to turkey numbers?
There's a study that's been done that gives us the assumption of 10% of our gobbler harvest in the spring is our gobbler harvest in the spring, represents 10% of that population. So going with that assumption, and then we have a bunch of different variables that we look at as far as what we feel we've done with habitat abundance, recruitment, that kind of thing. In the northern region, they have seen a slight bump of turkeys due to mild winters. And so it's just, it's looking at what's on the ground and what's in our harvest reports.
So what is the trend over the last, say, 2 years, 2 to 3 years?
1 second. So we have had a dip here in the last couple of years, since it looks like there was 2018, 2019, we were still climbing a little bit, and now in the last couple of years, we've declined some. So we are looking at.
Any chance you could share that graph with us?
Can I join the meeting? Gotcha. Okay, 1 second. Just give me a second so I can join the meeting, okay?
Other than air guns, I'd just like to say to I'm probably okay with the rest if they're going to visit the plan next year and really address these harder issues. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion on air guns too. Once we hit PR tax, I'm less opposed to it, but without that, I'm not in favor of it at all. It sounds like Wild Turkey Foundation has some perspective on air guns that maybe we ought to hear a little bit further too, though.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the air guns for a second. I agree about the PR money. It'd be nice to have that. But there's a couple things I want to address. Basically, the legislature told the division to implement an air gun hunt. So I'm concerned that if we just say no, that it's going to go back to the legislature next year, and we're not going to have the opportunity to decide what species are hunted with air guns. So I would rather make that decision here. And so I think I'm more on the side of, I don't have a problem with the species being recommended for air guns. And that leads me to the effectiveness of an air gun. current technologies with air guns it's come a long ways, and there's no, in my opinion, an air gun is every bit as capable as a 22. So from a ethical standpoint, I see no issues with allowing air guns anywhere that we allow 22. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Ben. Looks like Heather's got the graph up.
This is just overall, all of our stuff. I also have the central region broken down for turkey harvest if you want to see the fall harvest on that. But yeah, you can see that our hunter success has gone down a bit. So we are anticipating that we're seeing a decline and that we definitely have some drought related impacts.
When did we start the fall hunts? 17?
2014, we started the fall hunt.
2014 we started
But that
the
was,
fall hunt.
I think we have to specify really quick that that was very surgical. I mean, it was like this valley had it and nobody else had it. Like maybe Pablo Creek had it, but Indianola and the West Desert, they didn't have it. So it was like the numbers of toms. I mean, that graph that you showed, I mean, it was really small, and then now we're way up here. So 2018 is, I believe, when it went more statewide, correct? And more like unlimited?
I think 2019 is when we went. I can't speak to anything prior. I can confer with somebody else on prior to 2019. But as far as that, we did have some areas go unlimited. This is the central region, just male to female, so everybody can kind of get a grasp of that.
Can you go back to that last graph too,
Sure.
Heather, please?
Definitely. 1 second.
So it looks like this last year, there was 30% success with 19,000 permits. So roughly 5,700 birds harvested.
I can look up a number for you.
Because you look back when it was 3 years ago, it was 30%, but there were only 13,000 permits.
Right.
So, I mean, you're talking there, 4,000 birds harvested. So we're harvesting 50% more birds right now than we were 3 years ago.
So we had 19,000 permits and around 15,000 people afield, and our total harvest was 4,620.
So still 50% more harvest than maybe in 2018.
So 2018 was 3,300 harvest total.
Yeah.
And then we had 2019 and 2020 were in the 6,000s.
Right. So it is down from the last 2 years, but it's
Sure.
way above what it was before that.
Right. Yeah, we're still looking good. I mean, even prior to 2018, it's still in the 3,000s. Back to 2014 was in the 2,000s. So
That graph includes fall harvest also?
yeah,
Correct?
this should be everything.
Okay.
Total permits, that should be everything. Yeah.
Can you speak to ongoing transplant efforts? Are they still in place? Are
Absolutely.
we still doing that?
Yeah,
Have we slowed down at all?
Not even a little bit. So we've been translocating every year. We have seen fewer turkeys translocated. So this last year, we only translocated 722. And prior to that, the year before, we translocated 1,443. So we're seeing, again, just the overall population decline to an extent, largely due to drought, but we're applying for enhancements each year to get 2 technicians to help a couple of the regions with turkey translocation efforts. NWTF works with us every year on that effort as well. We have all of our turkey boxes and turkey traps that we've got for all the regions have everything that they need. So we haven't curtailed any of those efforts.
So the fall hunt is so that Wes and Jason and Dale don't have to spend all winter trapping turkeys? Is that what it's for?
A lot of times it's hard to trap turkeys once they get smart to a trap. And in a lot of areas, it's just more geographically difficult to set traps and have them be successful. We have drop nets, we have net guns, but sometimes it's just really difficult to get them to go in a trap. So.
Other discussion?
I know we keep bouncing around. Maybe we should just stick to one item, but the Pittman-Robertson issue causes me pause. But Ben brings up a good point that the legislature has directed the division to implement some kind of
To identify the species that can be hunted.
to identify them. Yes. So
I vote cottontail.
Yeah. Is there a way we can identify them, but not allow them to be hunted until they obtain some kind of a funding, and the legislature can, kind of put it back on them that they, once they get some kind of a tax associated with that, then they can use them.
I had heard discussions of a state PR implemented tax. I don't know really anything more than that, but that might be an interesting topic of conversation. And I don't know if there's anybody here that does know any more about that, but anyway.
Actually, I like that idea that approve them conditional upon getting PR, because we approved these air bolts or whatever a couple of years ago on the condition that they were going to get PR tax, and I've seen no movement there.
So if we went that route, would you want it to be actual Pittman-Roberts, or would it be acceptable that it's a similar state-run program or tax?
Personally, I'd be fine with either. If it's a pay to play, if you're investing in the wildlife of Utah with the purchase, I personally would be in favor.
I wouldn't have a problem with that.
I wouldn't have a problem with the division collecting a COR for an air rifle. I mean, if they could collect those funds, some kind of funding mechanism that.
Are you saying that are you suggesting that the DWR issue a COR to somebody that wants to use their air rifle?
Yeah, maybe something along those lines but that would have to be instituted legislatively, I believe.
Well, I do recall also that I believe that was pitched, some idea, that type of concept, and the legislature that was pushing this was adamant that was a no-go, that essentially it came down to like a 2A kind of a thing, like you're not going to make me pay an additional tax to take my rifle out hunting, and that was a no-go.
I think that just complicates things. I can't imagine it's that hard to tell Pittman-Roberts you want this weapon type to qualify. I mean, if that were the issue, I would think we would have heard some feedback on it. My assumption is there's some resistance to do that for some reason other than the benefit to us. So I think we put it back on them and say, once you're in the system, come play. Otherwise, stay out of the sandbox.
I agree. Danny, I heard you have a comment.
Yeah, about 15 minutes ago. Sorry. So, hey, I shoot PCP, air rifles and have for a long time. My main concern with that has always been, I even shot one tom. I always shoot them with my shotgun, right? Head shoot them. But quite frankly, I shot one tom one year that had been shot at with an air gun. You could tell by the entrance and exit wound through the crop. So the poor turkey was starving to death because all the food it put in its mouth came out both sides of its throat of its crop, and I felt so sorry for it. Was starving to death. I felt so sorry for that bird. I put it down. However, I am concerned with the wounding with these air guns. My air gun shoots at 800 feet per second, and it's not the same as even though it's a 22 caliber, it's not the same velocity as a 22 caliber, even a 22 caliber short. So I'm just saying that there is a difference.
Thank you, Danny.
I think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't recognize that not all air guns are created equal. I'm not up on the latest technology, and I'm a little disappointed that the owner of Utah Air Guns isn't here, because I think he lives right here in Springville, and I believe he's the one that was pushing this with the legislature. But anyway, to Danny's point, I believe a lot of these new current technology air rifles are shooting much faster than that.
I think that's true, and I think that with the proposed rule here, they've outlined what it has to have, that 30 foot-pounds of energy or whatever. And so I'm not concerned about, personally not concerned about that.
Yeah, same here.
So we can recommend any kind of hunt as long as we recommend a hunt with an air gun. We might as well kill two birds with one stone and make a predator hunt, so we can hunt the raccoons, and then as soon as there's a hunt for something, people seem to not be able to find them, and see there's not as much as there used to be. So let's eliminate the predators, make a hunt for the air guns, and
it probably has to be a game species.
Yeah, to that point, Chase, predators are unregulated, so that's already available. Is that a game species or a predator? I don't know.
There's only 3 left in the state, so I don't think you have to worry about that too much.
Well, the recommendation from the division is fall turkey, rabbits, and hares. Personally, I think that's a good place to start.
I'd probably start with the rabbits and hares.
I'm not going to vote, but if it came to a tie, that's what I'd vote for too.
So, we allow 22s for fall turkey. So why not an air rifle on fall turkey if we allow 22s?
Honestly, because of what Danny said a little bit. I've seen. So the thing with an air rifle, and I'm not an expert on them, but I don't know what the reload capacity is. I don't know, like you got somebody with a 22 or a 17, and most of the time they shoot more than one bullet. And I don't know, some of these are hand pump guns. So I know some of them go off of compressed air cartridges. Well, I don't know how that all works.
I can address that a little bit. So 2 things. Yeah, Danny saw that experience, but that experience could happen with any weapon type. That could happen with a 22. That could happen with one BB that hits a turkey from a shotgun. So, and I don't know that he knows that was from a pellet rifle. I don't know. Anyway, but that's my point, is that can happen. That kind of thing can happen from any weapon. To speak to the capacity and reload ability of an air rifle, I shoot rimfire matches fairly regularly, and there's an air rifle class that shoots in the same matches with us. Our stages are usually 10 or 12 round stages, and they have magazines that hold that many or more. So they can. It's just like a 22. You got bolt action, you got lever action, you got single shot. No different with the air rifle. They can have a 10 round mag and shoot just as fast. They are bolt action rifles. They can shoot just as fast as a bolt action 22.
Yeah, and that's what I have, Ben. I have a Marauder, and the thing is that I'm not if you could hit a turkey in the head with any kind of a ball or whatever, I'm good with that. But what happens is that people shoot these turkeys in the body with these air rifles, and they're just not as powerful or nor as destructive as 22 caliber rifles. That's all. I know that for a fact.
I think maybe out of the muzzle they are, but they only have half the weight of a projectile, so they do lose out momentum quickly.
Well, that depends on the rifle. Some of them shoot slugs.
Can I say something really quickly?
Absolutely. Say it, Heather. Bring us in.
Great. No, I did speak with Mitch King, who is the Air Rifle Shooting Association person in Montana. And he told me that just with us making the minimum caliber size on this recommendation 25 rather than 22 increases the success of lethal harvest exponentially. He let me know that the way that our minimum requirements, the way that they're set at 2,000 PSI from a pre-charged pneumatic air rifle, and that 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, and having that 25 caliber weighing 18 grains or more, that's going to be likely more lethal than a 22 or 17 from the rim fires that are currently implemented. So I just wanted to bring that up just to make sure everybody is aware of in the RAC packet, how that's laid out.
Right, and just to address that, you know, I started out with a 17 and I went to a 22. If it's 25, I'm probably okay with that.
It is 25 in the proposal.
Heather, thank you for that information. And to that point, I think it's important that we recognize that the typical air rifle we all grew up with, pellet gun that we all grew up with as kids, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about some pretty advanced rifles.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the rifle. I'm opposed to the tax.
I understand that. You're opposed to the lack of the tax.
Correct. Thank you for the correction. Any more discussion? I'd entertain a motion or motions.
Brock, I think we should probably break this up into a couple pieces. My thought.
So I agree. Does somebody want to make a motion regarding the air rifles? Maybe the air rifles first, then the fall hunt, or everything else, however we want to do it.
I'll make a motion on the air rifles that we approve the recommendation from the DWR concerning air rifles as recommended.
Okay, we have a motion from Ben.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. Can I withdraw that and restate? I want to make the motion that we accept the recommendation from the division as recommended, with the addition of that we allow them on condition of some type of PR tax being applied, whether that be state or federal.
Okay, we have a motion from Ben to accept the division's recommendation on air rifles as presented, with the exception that it is conditional upon some PR type tax at the state or federal level.
Yep.
Okay, we have a second from Scott. Any discussion on that motion?
Can this committee make that recommendation? Will it make any effect, or is it strictly an emotional play?
I think we can make that recommendation. I think the Wildlife Board could adopt that recommendation, and then that would put it back on the state legislature. Most likely in this scenario would put it back on the state legislature to implement that tax. That's my opinion. I'm not a lawyer.
Any other comment or discussion?
Yeah, I've got one more. This is Dan. Hey, the vast majority of pellet gun owners, whether they're PCBs or break barrels or whatever they are, the vast majority have those smaller calibers. So I'm not too concerned now with 25 caliber, because not that many 25 caliber guns are out there in the crowd. So that's why I would support this vote.
Thank you, Danny. Go ahead. Chase has a comment here.
Can you answer my question?
Kyle, are you still on there? Kyle?
I am.
There
Yeah.
he is.
So
have you been listening?
Question is whether you can pass the vote and whether it has an impact regarding the pitman fee or the fee for air rifles. Off the top of my head, I think I would rather you just go ahead and vote on it, but I probably need to look into this and we can discuss it at other RACs, and it doesn't hurt to have the board discuss it, but I think that's one I'd like to look more into, exactly what we can do with what's passed and where that tax is.
Thank you very much, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. And I would support Ben exactly what you're saying. I just wanted to, I'd want to think that it would make a difference and not just do it
Sure. Well, I think there's some precedence for that in what we did with the bolts a few years ago.
Right.
So similar concept.
Chase, do you have a comment here?
Just a question regarding the caliber recommendation, everything like that. Would there be, where most people that are pellet guns or gun owners are the little kid versions, would there be educational resources going towards letting people know that what they can and can't use regarding the air guns for that?
Heather, how would the public, just by the rule book and that's it?
Just by the rule book for the air guns? Yeah, they would just be following what we have outlined in the RAC.
I mean, that's no different than any other weapon.
Yeah.
We define legal weapons in the guidebook for every other hunt.
Thank you.
I'm going to call the question. The motion on the table is that we accept the division's recommendation on air rifles as presented, with the exception or addition that it is contingent upon a PR type tax at the federal or state level on the condition of. All those in favor? Danny, I can't see you, buddy.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously.
Okay, so I think that takes us probably next to the fall turkey piece.
Right.
And I'm struggling with this one because we've got the division's recommendations, but then we've heard support for it, we've heard opposition, and the opposition was because they think that this will impact the population in a negative way that will further decrease toms available in the spring. So honestly, I'd like to hear some more discussion on this because I don't know what to do with this.
I'd really like to just see a reduction in the number of tags any individual can have.
Can I say one more thing?
Go ahead, Heather.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to bring it back to just realizing that we can make these boundaries definitely smaller and more targeted. And that this isn't an overall population, because already it's only on private property where these turkeys can be taken. And so it's not people going up on the Forest Service or public properties and decimating the populations. And a lot of private property owners also don't allow hunting, which gives them refuge as well, but just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say that I understand that point of view. I don't necessarily agree with it, because the turkey flocks that I'm familiar with they summer and spring and fall on national forests, and they winter on private lands. And so those private landowners that utilize those tags, they can put a lot of pressure on a flock and really curtail the numbers. So I personally would like to see less tags. I love the idea of being more surgical. My hesitation there is once we turn it back, we don't have any idea what surgical means. I mean, it's interesting that this is a hunting strategy that has a real effect on a population, but there's no public input on the number of tags, the boundaries of the units. That all just goes internally to the DWR.
But there was public input and public vote. We voted on that to approve them to do that.
Yeah, well, and like many of the plans, we try to change them about every 6 months.
So speaking to the number of tags, I mean, there's 3 allowed in the fall. Personally, I don't have a problem with that number. And the reason why is these are meant as a tool to deal with problem animals and nuisance animals. So to me, I'm not concerned about the number of tags that a individual can have, because I feel it gives a little more flexibility in a landowner being able to deal with their issues.
So I'm kind of like where Ben is. I'm conflicted on this. I heard the comments here and I generally agree. We're talking a year, and then they're opening the plan and they're revisiting it, and you're not going to decimate or create a population in a year. I'd rather just let the committee discuss these topics and come up with the best way to move forward.
I see a trend of population growth, except for the last year. I see an aggressive transplant effort, and I see tags selling out in the fall. From my perspective, we reduce tags in the fall to give more opportunity to more people. We force the landowners to let people on if other people want an opportunity. People got to go knock doors and say, hey, can I come hunt on bird on your land? I think that's fully acceptable, and that's how we hunt on private grounds in Utah. I think that's appropriate. So I'd like to see the number drop back to at least 2. Maybe 1 bearded and 1 non-bearded. That's my preference.
Make a motion.
Yeah, was that a motion?
So I'd make a motion that we reduce the number of fall tags to 2, 1 bearded and 1 non-bearded, and accept the rest of the recommendations as presented.
Yeah, I'll second that. This is Dan.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to reduce the number of tags to 2, 1 bearded, 1 not bearded, however you say it, and accept the remainder of the recommendations as presented, and a second. Any comments on that motion? I'll call the question. Oh, go ahead, Chase.
Just out of principle, I would oppose that, seeing as the fall hunt is to be able to allow landowners to deal with the problem animals, and I don't think we should limit that at all.
And this is limiting it because they could still get as many tags on their property as they want, right?
One really quick, I want to explain my vote. I don't do this often, but I'm going to vote for that because I like that, on the stipulation that the division stated that they were going to look at making these more surgical, making these more targeted, and possibly reducing the numbers of those tags. So.
Yeah, and I think this is a good compromise. I felt that was a little overburdened. I think it's a compromise with 1 male and 1 female. You're doing flock control while you're still kind of limiting the take on toms. So.
Okay, we have a motion on, thanks, Danny. We have a motion on the table. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? I get to decide. I'm going to vote in favor of the motion. So the motion passes 5-4.
Sorry, one more clarification. I'm assuming by bearded and beardless.
1 hunter's choice, 1 non-bearded.
Thank you.
The no votes were Ben, Chase, Luke, Eric, and Ken. You guys want to express why you voted no so I can present that to the board?
Mine was just from the fact that I think the recommendation from the DWR and that there's the chance of actually decimating the population. I think that's just, for 1 year, not a huge issue.
Well, I'm not in favor at all of the fall hunt.
Okay. Chase?
I agree with Eric. I'll just go along with the recommendation from all that.
Ben.
My reasons related to reasons I stated earlier about I'm not concerned with the number of the 3 tags per individual, because it was intended to be used as a tool, and reducing that to 2 limits that tool a little bit.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. The next agenda item.
I'm so sorry, Brock.
Go
I'm
ahead,
gonna do
Heather,
all
let's hear it.
Did you also approve the Upland plan in this last one?
Approved the remainder of the recommendations as
Just
presented.
wanted to make sure.
Yes, we
Wanted to make
did.
sure it was in there. Thank you.
You're done. Come on up, Dax. Number 7, the landowner rule amendments, R657-43. Dax, I'll give you the same opportunity I gave Heather. Is there something you want to summarize or present before we ask questions.
Yeah, that'd be great. I realized this was over 30 minutes long, the presentation, when you watched it online. Could have felt, like there was a lot. And that's because Chad, when he gave the presentation online, he really kind of told the story of why we have the program we have, based on our values and the principles that we're taking into consideration, how the current programs work, what the issues were with those programs and the approach we took to try to resolve those issues through this rule revision, and then ultimately what we proposed. So, when Chad presented it, it was pretty long. It's because he was trying to tell the whole story of what was going on. But I guess just to sum it up pretty quickly, we really are not recommending a lot of big changes. The committee that was formed, a big diverse committee representing a lot of different constituencies, looked at these issues, looked at everything from, all the landowner programs in neighboring states to, considering the idea of not having any kind of program at all, and ultimately ended up going with the recommendation that stayed with a program really similar, a rule really similar to what we had, but just tweaked a couple of the key issues that had seemed to always rise to the top and be complications in the program. With general season deer, honestly, the big change is just updating how general season landowner deer permits are allocated. In the 90s, after a bad winter kill, the state reduced deer permits to about 100,000 tags. 97,000 of those went through the draw to public hunters, and 3,000 of those were reserved for landowners. And in the last 25 plus years, the way we hunt general season deer has evolved quite a bit. So the recommendation with regard to general season deer is to just update what we initially started doing to how we hunt and make it match how we hunt general season deer now. So it just takes 3% of the permits and does it on a unit by unit basis, because we now hunt general season deer on smaller units, and then also puts that in a draw for landowners, because as we've seen, the demand for general season deer permits has gotten really high, and that's the fairest way to make sure that they're available to landowners is just put them through a draw. So that's it in a nutshell for general season deer with the limited entry portion of the rule. Again, this is something that we'd worked on for years, received direction from multiple wildlife boards, multiple chairmen to address some of the issues there. Primarily, I think the two big fixes were to make sure that the way that those transferable limited entry vouchers were allocated to the landowner associations was done in a consistent, quantifiable way across the state. And secondly, to ensure that the public access that they grant in exchange for receiving those transferable vouchers was administered in a way that was fair and transparent. And so after looking at a lot of different systems, we really stayed fairly close to the existing system with the changes being those two areas. Making sure that the permits are allocated, the vouchers are allocated to the associations in a quantifiable and consistent way across the state, and then tracking the access so that it's done fairly and transparently. The committee dealt with a lot of different points of view, a lot of different constituencies, heard from a lot of folks, and the other change was the elimination of a variance to not allow any public access. But the committee did recommend, and the division is recommending, a second option for landowner associations where they can take a slightly smaller percentage of vouchers. In exchange, they give a much smaller percentage of public access to their lands, and then their vouchers are limited to hunt on their own lands. So that's kind of the 2 or 3 minute version of the 30-minute presentation. And with that, I'll let the RAC jump into it, and I'm happy to answer any questions or provide clarification if I can.
Okay, questions for Dax. Dax, before you sit down, I have one right off the bat. I noticed in the wording, it said that the late season muzzleloader would be excluded from this rule, but it said nothing about like the hams hunts or anything.
Yeah, and the intent of that committee was to continue to operate this program in the realm of, I guess, what we'd call our traditional limited entry hunts. We did specifically include language that it would not include the late season muzzleloader limited entry hunt on general season units, but perhaps we should have also included language to exclude the hams hunts, the management buck hunts and cactus buck hunts. I think that was the intent of the committee, and I think we'd be open to any kind of, if we need to clarify there, it might be good to make that tweak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dax. Other questions for Dax? Go ahead, Ben.
Dax, thanks for that summary. I'm looking for some clarification on with limited entry landowner vouchers and the public access to the private ground. How does that work? I'm looking at the memorandum here and I'm not sure that it's clear to me. Can you help me understand who gains access to those private lands, how many people, and how?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's, like I mentioned, one of the areas where it hadn't been really transparent or clear how that was done in the past. And that's one of the things we're trying to fix with this rule revision recommendation. So what we would do is when they conduct the draws for limited entry permits, the hunters that put in are assigned a number for, and they go with their lowest number, and then that's how they allocate the permits to the folks that have the lowest numbers when the draw results come out. And so if, for example, just to make it clean, say a Landowner Association was receiving 10 limited entry vouchers, then the first 10 individuals that also drew for that limited entry hunt would be contacted and told they had access to hunt on the LOA lands. And the LOA president would also be contacted and be given the contact information and names of those hunters. And because the limited entry hunts are weapon specific, oftentimes, we'll have archery, any legal weapon, muzzleloader for general season deer, for example, or sorry, for limited entry deer, for example. We would also rotate through the weapon types as we selected the public hunters that would be granted access to the private lands. That way, that perhaps spreads out how many people are coming at once and makes it so that it's accessible to any of the hunters applying for the limited entry permits, regardless of the weapon type that they applied for. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was a great clarification. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you.
Dax, are there any other programs where bucks and bulls tags are offered to private landowners where the public's excluded?
The only other program that we have where we give transferable vouchers to hunt limited entry bucks and bulls to landowners is the CWMU program, the Cooperative Wildlife Management Unit program. And in that program, there is a public, a percentage of the permits that are allocated to the public. So we don't have any other programs that give transferable vouchers to landowners without, in exchange, allowing at least some public access.
Thank you.
Has the division made permit-specific agreements with LOAs? So we received a letter, an email from the Sevier.
South Sevier saying
South
that
Sevier.
they were given 6 pronghorn tags.
Yeah, and is that a written agreement? Is that just a gentleman's agreement? How does that one work? Do you know?
So this program, the limited entry landowner permit program, is governed, it's a 3-year COR. It's done in a 3-year cycle. I do think in the past, especially at the beginning of this program, there may have been some handshake agreements between the division and some landowners. But I don't think any of those can be binding beyond the duration of the COR. As far as the South Sevier, I don't know if there's anyone that can speak to that specifically. I don't know that I can, but the program has evolved, over the years, and it's become more formal, as has much of the way we manage wildlife and allocate access to hunting and permits. Some of the things that maybe we used to be able to do with a handshake, it's a much more formal process, as you guys just spent, an hour talking about how we hunt fall turkeys on private lands. Just things evolve and change. I don't think it's ever the intent to mislead a landowner or anything, but these programs do evolve and change over time as well.
Dax, I have another question. I received 3 letters yesterday and today from different landowner associations. 2 I had time to read. 1 I received like 40 minutes before this meeting and I didn't have a time to look at it. But the one that we didn't talk about the pronghorn tags, was concerned about liability of public being on their land. What is their liability? Somebody's told me that if there's not a charge to be there, there is no, they're exempt from liability. What is the rule there?
Oh, I'm not an attorney, full disclosure.
I see Kyle jumping on, and so maybe Kyle can answer this.
I'm going to step away from this answer.
So under the Landowner Liability Act, as long as it's a nominal fee, which is like a minuscule amount, I think less than $1, landowners are generally relieved of liability of recreational activities on their land. So in this situation, a public hunter draws a permit and they are by rule allowed to be there. The landowners are not held liable or don't have any liability risk for that activity.
Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to know, Kyle.
Really quick, Kyle, while you're still there, does that pertain to any companions of the hunter?
Yes. I would loop in companions with that. They're all together on the activity. The real intent there is to recognize and support recreational activities in the state of Utah without punishing landowners.
Other questions for Dax?
Follow up on the companions. Does if somebody draws a public tag and they've got the low number and are allowed access, is there anything in this rule that defines number of people they can have with them?
That's another really good question. The intent is for this to be administered very similar to how we do with the CWMU program. There's some language in the rule that allows the landowner associations to come up with a set of rules that would be subject to approval. They've got to be reasonable, but it does provide landowners the ability to, come up with some rules that would govern how the access to their land would be administered. For example, you can't bring all your brother-in-laws and have a giant pallet bonfire, in the middle of where they like to park their trucks. So my brother-in-laws will be disappointed about that. But it allows the landowner to have a reasonable amount of control, yet still provide access. So, and that would be each individual landowner association would have the opportunity to draft those rules. And then they would be subject to approval. And also the intent would be that those rules would be applied consistently, whether it's to the folks that draw and are granted free public access or the folks that may purchase a voucher to hunt the lands.
Okay, thanks, Dax.
Thank you.
Then also, so while this recommendation makes some changes to this whole concept of public hunter accessing private lands, the concept itself is not new, right? This is already in our current rules in a little different format. Is that correct?
Yes. So in the existing version of the rule, allowing public access for the vouchers that the associations received was in the rule. There was a provision that allowed for an association to request a variance to not have to provide public access. And we did have one landowner association that consistently requested and was granted that variance. But all of the other landowner associations, I would assume were following the rule, and that has been in the rule. That's not a new component. It's something that's been in there for as long as I remember.
So really the change is maybe no variance allowed now, and maybe a difference in the number of tags allocated based on the area versus based on the gut feeling of the initial setup.
And even that, in the old version of the rule, it talked about allocating permits to the associations using acreage to do that. There were some other options too, but we went with kept it simple with just the acreage. So even those things that are changes, or perhaps, they're not revolutionary, they're not something new that wasn't in there before, it's maybe just tightening it up a little bit.
So really the major change is there's a new option. You could go instead of 50-50 to 80-20.
Yeah, and instead of getting a variance, you could choose an option that allows just a much reduced amount of public access.
Thank you, Dax. Other questions? Go ahead, Chase.
Following up on that, would any current granted variances be grandfathered in? Or would those be?
The intent would be that any existing COR would be honored through the duration until that COR expires. But then at that point, any new application would need to meet the rule, the requirements of the rule.
Okay. Another question, the recommendation of changing 600 per region tags to unit by unit, will that decrease total number?
It will. So we're jumping back to the general season landowner deer permits. It will. Like I mentioned, when that program was initially set up, it was 97,000 public general season deer permits, 3,000 for landowners, so 3%. And so the intent is to stick with that original 3%, but do it on a unit by unit basis. So at that point in time, we were issuing 97,000 general season deer permits. So 3% was 3,000. Today, I think general season deer permits that got approved a couple weeks ago here was mid 70,000s. So it would be a little bit smaller number.
2,250. If it's 75,000, I just.
It's not proportional. It would just be 3% and it would be adjusted annually. The landowner draw would take place after the regular general season draw. You know, the permit numbers would have been set the spring before, so we'd know what the permit numbers would be and be adjusted if things go well and we grow a bunch of deer and we decide we're going to issue more permits across the state, the number would go up. If we have, you know, these bad drought years and we lose more deer and we have to cut permits, they'd go down. It just would adjust proportionally along with the public permits. And the same is true for the limited entry landowner permits too, that, you know, as they go up and down on the unit, whether it's general season or limited entry, the landowner's share of those would also go up and down and just mirror the trend.
Other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public?
I have a few.
Excellent. Yep.
So if I'm correct.
If you'd state your name and who you represent, that'd be great.
Yeah, Whitney Hewlett-Krogh. I represent Diamond Mountain Landowners Association. They're out in Vernal. They're the Landowners Association that had the variance before. And I will say they are very concerned about letting members of the public on their land. Maybe that part's not a question. I'll save that for the next bit. But so my understanding is under these rules and the rule change, the state gets to choose which hunters come on public land, whereas before the landowners got some say in which public hunters came on their land. Is that right?
Yeah, the public hunters that would be granted access to the private land would be the order of the drawing for the permits. Yep.
Okay. And so if these public hunters are allowed on, how does the division intend to control those hunters being allowed on and other hunters being allowed or not allowed on? Like, who's supposed to control trespassing in this situation?
I'm not sure I totally understand. So the names of the folks that were given the access would, you know, that drew, the first people that drew would be put in contact with the Landowner Association. You know, the contact information for both of those parties would be shared with each other. And then based on the rules that the Landowner Association comes up with, you know, they could find the best way to administer that access. And
Okay. Is that part about sharing the names and contact information with the landowners in the rule itself? Or is that kind of an administrative idea behind the rules?
I don't know. I'd have to read back through to find for sure. If that's one, that definitely is the intent. If we need to add clarifying language to make sure that that's in there, I think we can do that if it's not in there. That's the intent.
The other question is, so these public hunters are allowed on. How it's been done previously is that, you know, people come to the landowners and ask specific permission to be allowed onto the land. So then it's by agreement, and the landowners can say, all right, don't go in this area. That's where I've got my cows. Don't go over here. And then if the public hunters, you know, leave trash or cut fences, the landowners know who they can go to for that. So with these public hunters that are granted permission by the state to go onto the landowner's private land, who's who's liable for any kind of vandalism, depredations, or, litter brought on by those public hunters.
Yeah, and I hope that by, putting those parties in touch with each other and the landowner associations having rules in place, we could avoid a lot of those type of incidents. I think if folks are littering or abusing lands, it's illegal to litter, it's illegal to trespass, it's illegal to leave a gate open or cut a gate.
Right.
So, our law enforcement folks would help landowners with those issues. The good thing would be that the landowners would know who was there. And hopefully that could help. I think the people that have permission have been in contact with landowners and are on the property are probably less likely to vandalize or do some of that stuff than if someone sneaks on without permission and anonymously. But
Well, I think that's been the case in the past when people specifically ask the landowners for permission. But then in that case, the landowners have the right to say, I remember you, I know you trashed up my neighbor's land, you don't get to come on. Whereas in this situation, it sounds like the state chooses and they just have to let them on. Is that right?
yeah, perhaps. We do have that cooperative wildlife management unit program that facilitates access for hundreds of hunters across the state on private lands every year. And we just very rarely have those types of issues. So I can understand the concern, but through, public access to private lands that's administered through a program like this across the state with hundreds of other public landowner or public hunters, especially when you look at both buck and bull hunters and antlerless hunters, we literally have hundreds, maybe even thousands of folks that get access to private lands each year, and we just don't have very many issues in that regard.
My understanding is, and this is kind of outside my knowledge base, but that CWMU program, that's implemented by statute, not by like rules and regulations by the division. Is that right?
I think so. If Kyle's still on, he can speak to the statute. I know there is specific language in statute with regard to the CWMU program. The landowner rule, there's not much language in statute. Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, that's correct. The CWMU program is created in statute.
Okay. And I think the CWMU statute, it has a specific provision in there related to liability for landowners, and specifically like a release of liability for landowners that participate in the CWMU program. But the rules the rule amendment that we're talking about here, it doesn't have a specific liability provision. I think that's just kind of relying on some other statute.
So my reading of the Landowner Liability Statute, which is the 5714-201, would extend to participants of the LOA program.
Okay.
Under the definitions of recreation, hunting is the number one activity defined under a recreational purpose.
Okay. And somebody mentioned before guests brought on by these private or the public hunters that are allowed to come on. This idea that the landowners would be able to create rules to, monitor how many people are allowed on, is that, you kind of just said that's subject to approval, but I mean, is there any metric or how do we know with these rules what that's going to look like, what the landowners will be allowed to do to protect their own private land?
Yeah, and they vary. Like I said, the intent is to model this after the rules that exist in the CWMU program, and they vary from CWMU to CWMU. I worked on a CWMU before I came to work for the Division of Wildlife. That CWMU allowed the hunter to bring one guest with them. I worked on my dad drew a tag on a CWMU a few years ago, and they allowed the hunter to bring, I think, up to 4 guests as long as they fit inside one vehicle, but they didn't allow camping on the CWMU. Many of them don't allow horseback riding, or some of them don't allow ATVs. So I don't think we have specific defined metrics as far as what constitutes a reasonable or unreasonable rule. So there's probably some subjectivity in making those decisions there. But from looking at what we have in the CWMU program, there's a pretty wide variety of rules depending on the different CWMUs, and we haven't had big fights or major issues over those.
So I've learned a lot about trophy herds in the past little while. And is it fair to say that these herds put more of a strain on range than, say, the general population, just because you have to have more to support these trophy animals?
I don't know, I don't know that the composition of the herd necessarily creates more impact. It's really going to be based on the numbers of animals. It is true, in order to have a lot of older age class males in the population, you're going to have more males in the population. So, in some way of speaking, perhaps, if you're managing a population for more older age class males, you might have to have more individual animals. But we can address those issues through our population objectives that we have on the unit. And so I don't know that it necessarily matters what the composition is as much as what the total numbers are.
Right. But I think the total numbers affect how much these herds are eating, because there's more of them, they're going to be eating more.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've talked with quite a lot of landowners who are saying that if they lose the right to control who comes onto their private land, that they're not going to be willing to participate in this program. And so if that's the case, does the division have a plan for how they're going to compensate these landowners for the depredations caused by these herds?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the presentation that Chad recorded, one of the lines towards the end of the presentation was, not every program works for every landowner, but we do believe that we have a program for every landowner. There's the CWMU program, the Limited Entry Landowner Association program. We have a walk-in access program. Then we have a depredation program where we work directly with landowners that, are impacted on their lands by wildlife. So there are other options. If the Diamond Mountain Landowners Association chooses not to participate in this program, I would imagine we're going to be doing a lot of communication and some troubleshooting, some problem solving. One of the things we've talked about in the region, these programs really do build tolerance for wildlife. Landowners, they provide valuable habitat on their lands, and the landowners on Diamond Mountain, they do a great job. They have great lands, and they provide a lot of habitat for wildlife. And that's why we have these types of programs. If the landowners decide they don't want to participate and they're not willing to tolerate wildlife on their lands, we'll have to have some hard discussions, but we're in the middle of going through our statewide elk plan right now. We can talk about the way we manage elk on Diamond Mountain, and if managing it as a limited entry elk unit, if that isn't the right direction moving forward, that's a change we could make. If managing Diamond Mountain as a limited entry deer unit isn't the right direction, that's a change we could make moving forward. We do have a lot of tools available as far as, we have private lands only, elk hunting permits, and we've done it before in other areas. If we need to reduce the population objectives and reduce the numbers of animals in that area, we'll do that. The division is committed to not grow wildlife herds on the backs of unwilling landowners.
You mentioned having kind of a flexible solution for different landowners, different types of range. One concern I've heard is that these rules, they I think that was kind of part of what you're saying is the benefit of this is that it removes some of the subjectivity. It's the same rules across the board for all of the different landowners. So how much variability is there in these rules for the different landowners, and what works for them versus what works for other places?
And I'm glad you bring that up. The division, we're trying to find a way to administer this program consistently across the state. And it's challenging because land on Diamond Mountain might be a lot different than land on the deep creeks. And we looked at the ways that all different states determine how they're going to allocate permits to landowners. Some states do counts. Some states do a GIS exercise looking at, water and cover. Different states do it different ways. And if we do go with straight acreage, there will probably be some properties and some associations that have more wildlife use on that acreage. And there's probably some properties enrolled in some of the LOAs that have very little wildlife use on that acreage. It's a good middle ground. And then one of the things I really like, and we've seen in some of the landowner associations, is that they're able to meet together as an association and write their bylaws. And in their bylaws, no one knows their lands as well as they know their lands. A division biologist, division personnel may be granted access occasionally to collect some data or cross through some private lands, but no one knows it like these landowners. And so I love that within the bylaws, they have the flexibility to evaluate different lands differently. I worked for years with the Book Cliffs Landowners Association, and they gave extra weight to acreage that was irrigated, irrigated cultivated cropland versus rangeland. And so, there is flexibility within the association for those members to evaluate the lands and decide the best way to allocate permits within the association. But the division doesn't want to micromanage and get in there and tell specific landowners whose place is better and whose place is worse and who should get this and who should get that. That ends up being really contentious. Most of the landowners I know, they're like most of the parents I know that think their kids are just a little above average or exceptional. And almost every landowner I've ever talked to is just convinced that their place is pretty exceptional and it's better than everyone else's place. And I love that. I think that's great. But it can make it really hard to come up with a way to differentiate and value lands that doesn't have subjectivity involved in it. And so that's why we went with the straight acreage. I feel like, and from talking to the neighboring states and looking at folks that do it differently than that, it feels like the most quantitative and consistent way that we can do it, and then allow for variation to that within the associations.
So before the bylaws, the landowners associations got to create them to decide on that within their body. But now we're moving to kind of the regulations or the rules will say, this is a straight acreage calculation.
Well, most of the associations have been going off an acreage calculation, like Diamond Mountain has, for example. A lot of them have been going off a straight acreage calculation for years. A few of them have come, Chad talked about it in the presentation, come and made special appeals to RAC meetings and wildlife boards, and pled their case and gotten granted, and they were granted additional vouchers through the case that they pled. But it hasn't always been consistent. For example, in the region where I work, I've seen, 2 different associations come to the board in the same meeting and both ask, plead their case and ask for additional vouchers. And one association was granted them and another association wasn't. And there wasn't really an objective or quantifiable way to determine that. So, and that was one of the big things that the Wildlife Board asked the division to fix with this rule, was to make sure that it was quantifiable, that it was consistent, and that it could be applied the same all across the state.
So is it fair to say that if the landowners choose not to participate, the state will likely put that area back into like a general hunt population, just eliminate the limited entry area?
That remains to be seen. I think we'd have to cross that bridge when we came to it. This is a voluntary program. The landowners don't have to participate in it. They're granted these vouchers to hunt public wildlife because of the value they contribute. And, there are a lot of units in the state that don't have a landowners association. Some of those units are managed as limited entry. Some of them are managed as general season. So that would be a process. Determining, how a unit is managed is something that we do in our statewide management plans. And I don't know that I can anticipate what is going to happen in the future, but it's something that's on the table that could be changed. So.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
Perfect. Other questions from the public? Go ahead, Troy.
Troy Justinson, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. Yeah, I made it through 2.5 times of that presentation, and I have a few questions. I deserve a star. So. But some of the questions I got, Dax, is one of which, what is the purpose of the Landowner Association? There's some people believe out there is to help cover, depredation type deal. Others, it's to encourage people to grow wildlife. If you, in a nutshell, I know it was said on that thing, but in a nutshell, what is the purpose of this Landowner Association?
It's to build support for wildlife, to have support from private landowners, to have more wildlife, have, better populations, bigger populations, and do it in a way that's tolerable to landowners. Am I giving you the answer you want? You're looking at me funny. If it was in,
I was born that way,
and,
Dax.
and I'm not Chad, so if I'm misquoting him in the presentation, let me know. I can look it back up.
No, that's all right. And then the other question I have is, these permits, where do they come from?
So that's a great question. For the general season deer permits, they would be issued in addition. So, the 3% is kind of on top of what gets approved, goes through the racking board process. For the Limited Entry Landowners Association, it is a voucher that allows them to hunt public wildlife. And in the first option anyways, it allows them to hunt the whole unit, not just their lands, but the whole unit. And when the division biologists, most of these limited entry units we're looking at, they're managed by buck to doe ratio, by age on pronghorn, and by age on elk. And so these limited entry landowner associations, there's not as much wiggle room in managing a limited entry herd as there is in a general season herd. And so they come out of the pool before it goes into the draw. Like, for example, if on a big limited entry unit, you were going to issue, 100 limited entry elk permits based on the age and the objectives in the unit plan and then the statewide management plan. And there was a limited entry landowner association that was going to get 10 limited entry bull elk permits. That would reduce how much goes into the draw by 10. So 10 of those would go to the landowner association and the other 90 would go into the public draw. Whereas if there wasn't a limited entry landowner association, there would be 100 permits in the public draw.
So it's safe to say that they're taken from the public's portion, that they don't have to draw.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. I appreciate it. I know that there's several committee members here. My question to you is, when you voted on this, was it on consensus? Was it majority? And what was that vote?
Yeah, it came on consensus after numerous meetings with various interests, from those who didn't want one landowner tag in the state of Utah to those who wanted a lot more than they already have. And in the end, those who showed up to the meeting, those last meetings, it was on consensus.
In this plan, is there a metric? Now, you tell me what the purpose of this landowner association is.
I can jump back to that if you want. I got all the bullet points now.
I'm trying to set you up for my question.
I didn't help you. No
Don't call
assist.
enthusiasm, right?
I'm sorry.
Is there a metric to gauge success and if this is working? You know what I'm getting after? We have a conservation permit program. We have 200 permits. There's an audit that goes annually. We go through, there has to be an accounting to, hey, this is what we brought in, this is what we've done with it. Is there a metric inside this plan that gauges that this is working, that it is worthwhile taking those public permits out of the draw?
I don't think there's a formal metric to evaluate it. No.
Okay. Is there a metric? I heard you talk a little bit about numbers. Is there a metric inside this plan to help gauge use? Meaning, you mentioned earlier that some lands are more profitable than others. Is there a metric in this plan that says, all right, you have to have use on this land that benefits wildlife? I mean, wildlife using it in order to participate in this program.
So the land does have to be considered habitat. And our biologists around the state have drawn a polygon, basically drawn a shape on the map, and that shape is informed by counts, classifications, collar data, et cetera, that defines what's habitat. Because there are some places that are not wildlife habitat. So there is defined wildlife habitat. There's definitely different values within what's considered habitat. This plan, we had a lot of discussion about that, but in this plan, we don't go into it beyond acreage other than it has to be within what's designated as habitat.
So it looks like good habitat, but necessarily there's no validation saying, yeah, wildlife's using this.
If we designate it as habitat, it's probably getting at least some wildlife use, but like Mr. Bear's property on the south side of the Book Cliffs might have like 3 or 4 deer walk across it.
He shouldn't be in there.
Once in a while. And I'm just giving you a hard time. two deer. I'm just giving you a hard time. And then there's definitely our properties that have high densities of animals through extended periods of time through the year. There is a lot of variation. There are some properties that it's probably pretty marginal value to wildlife. It's considered habitat, but some have pretty low use.
Thank you.
John, come on up.
Oh no, I wouldn't have teased him if I knew he was coming up next.
Promised to only ask one question, all right?
That'll be a first.
In the past program, and I've sat on the RAC and the board where landowners have showed up and said, I know that I'm only entitled to X amount of permits, but for years I've gotten this many permits. And because the precedent has been set, I'm entitled to this many permits. I know that working with this committee, that was a huge concern, that if even though a landowner association has been getting X, if they're entitled to Y, that's what we feel like they should get. Where's the teeth to that, and how are we gonna curtail the you've been getting it for 10 years, so we'll just keep giving it to you even though you qualify for less or more?
And that is, that is one of the big issues that we dealt with this rule every time it came up with different boards. And that the direction is to come up with a formula-based way that these permits are allocated. And that's why we went with acreage. And what we would be asking for the RACs and the board, as they approve this plan, they're approving the formula that we would use to determine, whereas whatever percentage of wildlife habitat that is private, that is enrolled in the LOA, that would be the percentage of the permits they would get, that the Limited Entry Landowner Association would get. And if the permits went up, their percent, because it's a percentage, their number of vouchers would go up. If the public permits go down, their number of vouchers would go down. And it wouldn't be a numbers game every time it goes through the public process. It would be, asking the RACs and board to approve the formula so that it's set and we don't end up with a big argument every time we have to look at the numbers for each individual association.
Thank you, Dax. Other questions from the public? I'll turn the time over to Jason to present yeah.
Are you asking for just questions or comments?
Questions right now. If you want to make a comment, you have to have a card. Okay, now we have, Jason will present the public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the landowner rule amendments, we had 3 responding votes, as it were, I guess, come in. We had one that strongly disagreed, one that strongly agreed, and one that was neutral. Of those 3 people that indicated how they felt, there was only one that left a comment, and the comment was from the strongly disagreed, and they said landowner permits are being severely abused. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Jason. Now we'll take the public comments. The first one is Jim Gowans. Each person will have up to 2 minutes. Once you start talking.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments. I have been in this business a long time, and I've been in charge of a committee for 30 years. And I see a lot of changes. And the concern I have is or maybe just changes this title to this title and going on from there. But sooner or later, I think, I was to a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the LOAs in the eastern part of the state. And there's some concerns that we're not following through with some of our things that need to happen in terms of a lot of this. I didn't expect to come here tonight. As I said, I am a leader in the LOAs in the West Desert region. And it's working fine, but there is some problems coming up. And a lot of it is with people having a regular permit and just pushing their way on the private property. And if something doesn't happen about that, I think somebody's going to get hurt. And so I would like to, maybe, I haven't had a chance to read all of this, but I would like to see us maybe really key in on what's happening. Like I say, I've been around too long.
10 seconds to wrap up.
But I ought to wrap it up. I guess I'm 93 years old. But I have some real concerns because I am a rancher and I do run cattle, and there's lots of things happening on the range that are coming from these kinds of things that haven't been followed through on. And that was my concern. And my son actually put something together, but I've got some other things. And he had to go to another meeting. He's a school board.
You see the one that, yeah, he sent me the letter, so everybody's seen that letter.
You seen that?
Yep.
What did you think?
So that's why I brought up, Jim, your time's up, but that's why I brought up the question about liability and stuff like that, because that's what was in that letter. That's exactly where those comments came from.
That's exactly what it needs to happen.
So I appreciate your comment.
And we would be happy to work with anybody as far as that goes. We do allow people to come on property. And I know I'm over time.
You are, and I'm going to cut you off, buddy. Thank you so much.
But anyway, I wanted to make those comments because I think there is a problem.
I appreciate your comment, Jim, and that's why I brought those questions up earlier. That was directly from your son's letter.
Was it?
Yes.
I'll tell him that you liked his letter better than you like my comments.
Next one, Whitney Hewlett-Krogh. Please state your name and who you represent, and then 2 minutes.
All right, Whitney Hewlett-Krogh for Diamond Mountain Landowners Association. So as I referenced before, Diamond Mountain is really concerned about losing the ability to control who comes onto their private land. Right now, they let public hunters on, but these are hunters that reach out to them specifically and get permission, and they have the right to refuse people, but they are able to control this, to control access. Before that was the case, so when this was a general hunting unit and they had a really difficult time controlling who came onto their private land, the last year that was the case, they had 26 dead cows from being shot, 1 dead horse, and 7 cabin burglaries. So these people remember what it was like when public hunters were just on their land all the time and they could not physically control the trespassing. And the law enforcement was overworked, couldn't get there in time, and so they were just left with dead animals, burglarized property, cut fences, and it was a real mess. So the other problem with this rule in managing trespass is that this rule treats all of these public hunters who get access the same. They are all allowed on all of the private land. So one private landowner can't say, all right, I'm going to let these 2 hunters on my land. If they have one of these special permits, they can go anywhere they want in the Landowners Association private property. And so if there's a prime piece of property that all the elk like to hang out at, all of the hunters could converge on that private property, and that one landowner is going to have an unfair burden on his or her land. So They are, the DWR is telling us that they are going to give us the contact information of these public hunters that get access, and they're going to have the LOA make rules that the hunters will have to agree to, but that's not in the rules. And at this point, we're just not willing to accept that on faith. I think I'm over. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, Christopher Robinson. Commissioner Robinson.
Council member.
Council member Robinson.
Thank you. I served with John and Mike and Scott and several on the landowner committee. It was a long and I think transparent, robust process with participation from lots of different stakeholders. To me, one of the guiding principles is that it's trying to increase the tolerance for private landowners for having big game on their property, but it also needs to be balanced against the public interest. And I thought we did a good job of, and there was some polling done as well, to balance the landowner interest versus the public's interest, because as was mentioned, when a voucher goes into a landowners association in these limited entry units, it's taken out of the public draw. So there is an effect there. And I'm also a manager of one of three in the Pavat Landowner Association, Pavat Mountain Landowner Association. This rule would likely reduce the number of vouchers we would receive because it'll be based on a formula, as you have heard, that's mathematical. It's the total acres of habitat divided by that, the percentage of such acres that are held by the association. While I don't like to lose vouchers, there's a spirit of fairness in me that I think that should be a guiding principle. The other principle that I see relates to, the two options of if you want to hunt just your property alone, there's fewer vouchers given, but there's less public access. But if you want to hunt the whole unit, it seems like there ought to be some fairness, which this rule allows, that then that same number of vouchers that you're receiving, those hunters should have access to your private lands. I know that that's not a popular concept in some quarters, but I think that what we tried to do as a committee was to come up with a fair rule, and I think we've done that. Thank you. And I think I have 13, 14.
No, you've gone over 13, but I let Jim go, so I let you go for a few extra seconds. And
I just want to say the best thing about this meeting is I saw my old friend Jim Gowans, whom I wasn't sure was still around.
Thank you, Christopher. Next comment from Troy Justison.
Troy Justinson, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. Man, I wish we could talk about a non-controversial item like trail cameras or baiting. I tell you what, I have struggled with this. I realize the importance that private lands play in wildlife management. But 2 points I made in the questions here, I really want to thank the committee for the time and effort they put into this. There's a lot of men that sit on that I have a lot of respect for. And SFW will support the recommendation, but we'd like two things added. One of which I think the division and the wildlife board need to get together and come up with a metric that gauges use. I'm all for rewarding the guy that benefits wildlife, that has wildlife on his property. I'm not in favor of writing a check to a guy that has decent habitat with no wildlife. I think that's important. The other thing is, I think we need to validate this. As I mentioned, the conservation permit program, the 200 permit program, we have a system in place that validates it, that we can go to our sportsmen and we can answer to them and say, hey, you gave up these tags, and because you did, this is where we invested it, and this is where what we accomplished. I'm not opposed to these individual landowners making money, but there has to be money invested back in the resource that the sportsmen have a benefit to. So what I had asked is there's a metric to gauge to make sure that this is accomplishing what it's meant to accomplish, to increase wildlife, to increase opportunity and habitat. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. John Bear.
Appreciate the opportunity to be able to address the RAC. You know, it was an honor to sit on the committee. And, you know, there needs to be some weight given to what Chris has said, because the only landowner that has more property in the state of Utah than Chris, I hear, is Jesus himself. So there needs to be some weight there. But I feel like we put a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we discussed everything that you can imagine in this committee. And talking with a couple of RAC members, maybe the one thing that I think maybe we should have added was an option that if a landowner doesn't want to play and doesn't want to be part of the association because they don't want to allow public access, that's fine. We'll give you some permits, but your permits are non-transferable and they're only good for your property. I mean, I'm not taking credit for that. That was a group discussion, but maybe that needs to be an option. If you don't want public on your land, that's fine. But you're not going to take the public's permits and then go hunt on the public land, because most of these permits are, you know, we sell them, we do whatever. And then these guys go hunt the public land. I mean, I'd bet good money that the majority of these permits are used on public land, not on just on the private. I really appreciate everybody that was part of the committee. I think we have a really good product here. It's a great starting point. I also trust the process immensely. And if the RACs and the boards decide to dice it up a little bit and make some changes to make it better, it's more important to get it right than to say I was right. So, you know, I appreciate everybody's willingness to take this on. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Last comment, Wade Garrett.
Does that mean you want me done already, John? I think that clap was to tell me I was done. Thank you. Wade Garrett, Utah Farm Bureau. Appreciate. I as well served on the committee, and we had a lot of tough discussions as some of these guys around the table. We had all angles of no permits, and as somebody that represents private landowners, the private land proponent is very important to me. But I also understand that these are permits that are a public resource, and we need to figure out how to balance that. I, with John, think we came up with a pretty good product and worked really hard for 15 months. Is that what we went? Meeting frequently, Chris, and others here. But again, I trust the public process, and if there's changes that need to be made, I would second what John said, is let's work through and get it right. But we did work hard. I want to make sure we protect private property. That is important. It is important for wildlife in the state that we have that, but we also need to be considerate of the public resource and work on getting those two things together and right. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Wade.
45 seconds.
Look at that, buddy. I'll turn it over to the RAC for discussion. Go ahead, Jim.
So did I hear that correctly, that in 15 months, you guys worked very hard to come up with this product, and it's very slightly different than the product that was there before?
Dax is nodding his head. Yep.
I mean, that tells you something, A, that it was a pretty decent product before, but that you guys confirmed it was a decent product before, but made a few changes. That gives me a lot of value to hear that. So thank you for that.
Go ahead, Ken.
Well, I like the comment that Bear made with if the landowner doesn't want to play in the game, anybody wants permits, that he may get the permits, but they are not transferable and he must hunt on his own property. I think that's something very important. I know there's a lot of people that don't like the idea that the landowner permits are transferable, and I like that comment that John made.
commenting on that as well. I agree. I mean, I definitely recognize the importance of landowners and what they do to benefit wildlife in the state. But this is a public resource. And so if they're not going to benefit the public with the public resource, then I like this idea maybe.
So
Scott first and then Jim.
yeah, great discussion. Troy, I appreciate the ideas you brought up there, and John, your idea there. All those things were things that we hashed out, right? Those were on the table early, and a dozen other things that were equally as divisive and hard cutting. They were, right? I mean, we had very frank conversations. Keep in mind with the Landowner Association, you have to have 50% of the private lands enrolled. By virtue of that, Troy, you're going to end up with, because of that map has poor quality habitat in it, you have to have poor quality habitat in it. Think that through. The division map doesn't only have high quality habitat in it. It has all big game habitat in it. It's not rated from 1 to 10. It's rated as big game habitat or not big game habitat. So the challenge there is that you have to have a bunch of guys with moderate to poor quality habitat to reach that 50% criteria. It's just got to work that way. So think that through relative to your statement, because I think we've incorporated that in the rule as it exists.
Go ahead, Jim.
So I want to go back then to your comment, just so I understand. This idea, the potential amendment or change of letting a landowner who pulls out still have landowner tags or voucher, but could not be transferable. Is that correct?
That's an idea that we've talked about,
So,
John, throughout
right.
here. I don't know if it's a good idea or not.
Yeah.
We should discuss it.
I guess my question is, if you're in a limited entry unit, does a private landowner qualify for a free landowner permit in a limited entry unit? Because I live in one and I've been told I'm not.
So if it leads to greater tolerance and investment into wildlife on the land, so then I don't see the negative in that. Scott.
So numerically, that's not going to work out. All right, the proportion of permits that are allocated to the Landowner Association is relative to the acreage of private land that's enrolled relative to the whole unit. There are very few that have more than, 10 across all the landowners. So if one guy pulls out, he's never getting any permits, unless he happens to be like a majority landowner or something. But in general, I don't think that guy's ever going to get a permit.
Yes,
No,
and
but-
really quick, Brock, to go along that, the idea that John talked about, we kind of talked about before, is that if a landowner association, not a landowner.
Right,
that's where-
association is
if
what
a
I was referring to.
Yes, if a landowner association does not want to have public hunters come on them, then maybe we could give them tags that are non-transferable that can only be used by those members of the association, which in the real world, I don't see you getting 50% of the public or the private land habitat, 50% of those, of 100% of those landowners wanting non-transferable tags. The reason why they want the tags is because they're transferable, and transferable means cash. And right now, big antlers means big money. So we could put that in there, and I would be fine with that, but it would be as a landowner association, not as a landowner.
No, I agree with that. I didn't mean single landowner. I meant association. I mean, that seems to be one of the comments that we heard is we don't want any public. Well, here's an option. I don't think it'll work because
Yeah,
I
that-
think.
that
Mike's
entirely
exactly right.
disincentivizes the whole purpose for the LOA.
Right.
If they're not doing it just to hunt, they're doing it to generate revenue.
I personally like where the rule is. I think you guys did a lot of
Yeah.
work. I've read the rule. I mean, I've read the proposal. I listened like Troy 2.5 or 3 times to Chad, and I'm still not 100% sure. And, but I mean, I think this is a good landing spot where a public resource and there's incentive to benefit the public and provide landowners incentive to participate and benefit wildlife.
There is something that I'd like clarified, and because maybe I'm the only one that's a little bit confused. During the presentation, I heard a couple times that if they chose the hunt on private land, then they would get less vouchers, but then they would have to have less public hunters come on them. I don't think they get less vouchers. Do they? Well, the split's different. So how does that, explain it one more time on that?
Okay, let me see if I can explain it. I'll use just a super round number to make it easy. Say a landowner association would qualify based on acreage, they'd qualify for 10 permits. If they did the option 1, they would receive, or they qualify for 10 vouchers. In option 1, they would receive the 10 vouchers that would be valid unit-wide. In exchange, they would allow 10 public hunters to hunt on their lands. If they chose the option 2, the number of vouchers they qualify for, again, is based on acreage, which would be 10. But then if they chose the 80-20 split, it would be reduced from 10 to 8. But then they would only have to allow 2 public hunters access to hunt on their lands, and their vouchers would only be valid on their enrolled lands.
Yeah, that's how,
kind of confusing. Did I?
No, that's how I understood it, but I just wanted to hear it clarified in the public.
Go
which
ahead,
which
Scott.
is pretty similar to the alternative we're kind of discussing, right?
I don't think that alternative would work. Nobody would participate.
That's where we landed with that alternative with the committee and with the idea that no one would bite, but it's on the table.
Go ahead, Ben.
I tend to agree that at first I liked that idea of the, you don't want to allow public access, here's another option, but I agree with it. What everybody said that I don't think it would be participated in because they're looking for revenue. In the presentation, it was, the list was shown of committee members. After looking over that list of committee members, I thought, man, this looks like a great committee, and I imagine these guys put in a lot of time and effort, and I appreciate that. So thank you to you guys that participated, and given the people that were on that committee, I have a lot of faith in the product they came up with, and just looking through how this is being recommended, I like it. I like it a lot. I really like the formalization of the public access. Because that has been a component always, but has been very not well known, and this I like the formalization of that. So I'm in support of this. I like it.
Eric, go ahead.
So a couple of things to the discussion. There was one, the question was asked that the division notifies, and they said yes, but in here, so I don't know if this rule, how this fills in, it says the division is not responsible for identifying recipients of the vouchers after the vouchers are awarded to a landowner by the drawing process. What does that mean? Is that something different than? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right, that's good enough. But then because there's one part in here that was brought up by Ms. Whitney, and I thought this was good in here, if I can quickly find it again, that there was a clause in here that says that the Landowner Association must provide a written copy of its guidelines used to regulate a permit holder's conduct as a guest on their lands. So I think that the way I understand that is you guys can be as specific as you want to have the respect that you want on your public or your private lands by that hunter that was granted access. So I think that that's something I think, you go take it back to your associations and put it in as well as you want to. I think that was well included in that discussion.
And there's a long history of that through the RAC system or through the CWMU system, right? You can go back and look at every CWMU has a list of rules that they give out to their hunters. And it seems to work very, very well. I don't know why it wouldn't work on Diamond Mountain. It works everywhere else. I will say, I hunted on a CWMU one time, and I thought their regulations were very, very strict. They came and picked you up at their little campground in their pickup, and they drove you out, told you which elk to shoot, and then they went and gutted it for you and picked it up, brought it back to your truck. It was like crazy. But that's what they wanted, right? They didn't want people running around, so that's how they dealt with it.
They didn't shoot it for you.
No.
Not that he'll say in public. Chase, go ahead.
So with that, would it then be agreed under the rules that any rules that are on CWMUs would be allowed for the landowner associations to make similar rules then? Be as strict as the CWMUs are or can be?
Dax is nodding his head in affirmative.
So the intent there is largely that there's fair play between the public hunter and the private. So if the LOA is going to allow this set of rules for the hunters who buy their permits, buy their vouchers, that same set of rules applies to the public person across the board. You don't want anybody hunting on Sunday, then neither group hunts on Sunday. This guy can't have an ATV, this guy can't have an ATV. That's the intent.
Yeah, and the division's going to have to pass those and accept those rules. I mean, there's got to be, somebody's going to have to come into play there. The other thing we have to remember is, so if an LOA gets, 10 public hunters that are able to hunt on their private LOA lands, that doesn't mean 10 public hunters are going to hunt on their private lands, because the public hunters can hunt the whole unit. So if I had a Ponsagon tag, I don't think I'd be hunting on most of the LOA lands. I'd probably be hunting, out on the public lands as the deer migrate through. And we can use many examples like that. So just because an LOA gets assigned, a certain number of hunters, that doesn't mean those hunters are actually going to hunt on those lands.
Yeah, and many of those guys may have no interest in that, right? They drew the permit because they knew the public ground, not the private ground.
Yeah, and
that was one of my gripes all the way through, is that those 10 guys might not have any interest in hunting the ground anyway.
Exactly. And another thing about it is, the one thing we need to be careful with, and is that the rules don't deter people from wanting to hunt on those LOA lands. Like, you can bring one guest or no guest. There's some CWMUs that allow no guests. That's not an acceptable rule, in my opinion. So every problem can't be written into the rule. It can't be foreseen. So there has to be some trust placed there with the division, accepting those rules. But I personally think, there's some things that I would have liked to have seen in the LOA rule. I didn't get everything I wanted, but I think that this is a pretty good document to guide. It's a partnership. It protects the public and it protects the private landowners. Because it might be private land, but it's a public animal. It's a public resource. And so we just all need to be good partners. And I think that it's a good rule.
Any other discussion? I'd entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we accept the rule as presented by the division.
My second.
So we have a motion by Eric to accept the rule as presented and seconded by Scott. Any discussion on the motion? Do we want to add language about the hams hunt that Dax alluded to at the beginning, or not?
It might be a valid issue, especially with how few permits there are. Dax, on those hams hunt areas that you're familiar with, like, do you like, we didn't discuss that in committee. Yeah.
So go ahead. It says in the rule that this will not apply to the late season muzzleloader hunt, but it doesn't say in the rule about those other specialty hunts like the hams hunt. Yes. Correct. So I would say that we might want to, if Eric could be open to it, we might want to have a friendly amendment to add language relative to the specialty hunts like the hams hunt.
So, like, are you familiar with like Book Cliff's Floyd Canyon at all? I mean, outside your wheelhouse.
It's outside my region, but
Kobe, you're prize boy. I imagine those were kind of small units selected to, hunt specific herds, but there probably is some private lands within those units. So it might actually be easier to get to that 50% in those hams units than it is in a regular limited entry unit. Is that kind of what we're thinking?
And I think this rule revision was really trying to focus on what are our traditional limited entry hunts, not the hams hunts, not like a cactus buck hunt or a management buck hunt, but our traditional limited entry hunts. And that, I think the division would be pretty open to an amendment to keep it with what are, like I said, I don't know that we have a formal terminology, but kind of our traditional limited entry units, limited entry hunts.
And I'd be open to that, but I don't know what terminology I would use.
Are you open to that amendment, Eric? And would you still give the second? So we can let the wording work out, Jason and I, but basically it would be to traditional, it would be apply only to traditional limited entry units, not cactus buck, not hams, not late season, that. Any other comments on the motion on the table?
I'm just struggling with, do we have a reasonable definition for that? That's where my struggle's at.
Dax, what would be a reasonable definition? Reasonable.
Excluding cactus bucks, management bucks, and hams hunts.
There you go.
And
excluding cactus bucks, management bucks, and hams hunts.
I like that till we create another one.
And if we create another one, we might have to add more wording into this rule in the future.
All right, that's fair.
Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, Danny, all opposed. So passes 7-1. You want to express your comments so I can share with the board, Chase?
Take that up with him. No, I just share concerns of that. As the ag representative, I just have to share the concerns of the private landowners that are worried about, the public always wants to, it feels like the public always wants to encroach on the landowners, and I'm just trying to protect the rights of landowners, and any concerns that they have, I also share. So just trying to be on the side of the landowners and trying to protect our rights. I know that there's compromises both ways in here. I'm just trying to say that I don't like seeing any more being taken away from landowners than necessary.
Thank you very much. I have nothing else on the agenda. Anything anybody wants to bring up? Then we're adjourned.